for this first segment today, I'd like to invite Mr. Alex Mudabetti, the co-chair of the expert group on the integration of statistical and geospatial information, to kick us off with an overview of the progress the ISGI has achieved in the past year and to help promote its background documents submitted at this 11th session. Alex, over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mark. My name, as indicated, is Alex Mudabetti. I'm from the Namibia Statistics Agency. I'm the co-chair of the expert group on the integration of statistical and geospatial information. Of course, my fellow co-chair is Ms. Catherine Gebers from Germany. I would like to welcome you to this first session of this side event. You can move on to. I wanted to start off with just a promotion and part of the submission that the expert group has made to GGIM 11, and this regards the global survey on the readiness of the implementation of the global statistical geospatial framework. Now, this survey started around April, May. It was submitted to our regional committees to distribute to their various member states. So far, we have 90 complete replies, which were submitted from 76 member states and 2 non-member state observers. 59 of the member states submitted a coordinated reply from the statistical offices and national geospatial information agencies. 41% of member states submitted singular replies, representing only one organization. Now, I think the key highlight already shows that roughly 20% of responding countries have no or little awareness of the GSGF. So I would like to take this opportunity as a co-chair of the expert group to promote this particular survey. The survey is still open. We'll share the link at the end of this first session. You can move on to the next slide. Secondly, I wanted to contextualize our work as expert group. We started already coordinating with the regional committees, and we acknowledge the fact that there are many moving parts in terms of the work on integrating statistical and geospatial information. And the expert group has moved to strengthen the coordination on this particular topic. And if you look on your left-hand side, we have so many players in terms of integrating statistical and geospatial information. But that needs to be coordinated to the regional working groups on the integration of statistical and geospatial information, and of course, member states. Now, we as expert group, we have our reporting mandate to both GGIM and the Statistical Commission. And our submission to GGIM 11 outlines our progress made so far in the work, global work on the integration of statistical and geospatial information. We are going to have, of course, we are going to continue our coordination effort. And in November, October, we plan to have, again, another regional coordination meeting. If you can move on to the next one. In terms of reviewing the work of the expert group, the work has many components, several components. On your left-hand side, we have our translation work, and in the middle, we have structured the work of the expert group into two work streams and task teams. We have 3 work streams: work stream on interoperability, work stream on common geographies, work stream on recording, and then the task teams. We have 2 task teams on confidentiality and privacy and capacity building. And the survey that I just highlighted, the global survey, was conducted through the task team on capacity building. And with me, you'll see later, is a presentation by my fellow colleagues, expert members, Vincent also from the US Census Bureau, who is coordinating work on geocoding. And we have also Peter Murphy from Statistics Canada, who is going to speak to you about common geographies. I'm going to provide context as well on the task team on privacy and confidentiality. Now, with this, this outlines our work. You'll see on your right-hand side, we have the work is strengthened by consolidated national examples. And the other part, moving part of the expert group work is finding the interlinkages between the GSTF and the IGI. Currently, this particular work is still ongoing, and you may not find much on the submission that we've made to GGIM 11. And the ultimate, you can just go on next slide, please. Yeah. Now the ultimate goal is just for us to have a consolidated document that consolidates guidance for member states implementing the GSGF, particularly on the integration of statistical and geospatial information. And a draft version has been submitted now to GGIM 11, and finalized version is expected to be provided to the Statistical Commission, hopefully in March 2022. So the work that we are providing now is based on the draft document, which incorporates the work of the work stream and the national examples. Next. Now, in terms of reviewing the work of on the translation, we acknowledge and we want to thank the Chinese government for the translation. So Chinese, French, Spanish have been finalized so far, and we want to thank China, Canada, and UNECA, Economic Commission for Africa on the French, and Mexico and ECLAS and others for Spanish translation. Arabic is being finalized at the moment. And the draft, on the draft guidance, we want to highlight that the draft implementation guide is submitted to GGIM 11 just to seek the perspective of the committee of experts. And following the 11th session of the GGIM, the documentation will be finalized for endorsement by the Statistical Commission, as I highlighted. And this is the link I believe you have access to the slides. And the national examples, we received responses from 29 member states in terms of providing their examples, including how they are using the GSTF in responding to COVID. So 29 examples and 2 regional commissions have been submitted. This is just a highlight. With this, you can move on to the next slide. Yeah, I want to hand over now to Vincent, just to take us through the work on geocoding, just a key highlight. Thank you.
Thank you, Alex, and good morning. As Alex said, I'm Vincent Osier with the US Census Bureau. I was the founding member of the expert group with Tim Trainer almost a decade ago. And so I was asked to speak on geocoding this morning. I chair the geocoding group, and we had presented our scoping paper to the Statistical Commission last spring, and it was accepted. So geocoding is, as most of us know, is the core and base of a lot of the Global Statistical Geospatial Framework, or GSGF. The statistical units in question, whether dwellings or places of business, provide a geographic location tied somewhere on the earth in our case. And this opens the door to other aspects of the GSGF, especially tying them to common geographies, which Peter Murphy will speak about. In turn, that allows things like the application then of privacy, data disclosure methodologies to be tied and applied so that these areas can be, the data can be protected even when you have the specificity developed during the geocoding process. The whole discussion of geocoding demonstrates the importance of the global fundamental geospatial data frames, especially the one that everything relies on, with the global geodetic reference frame, or as we mentioned, the XY coordinates, and sometimes the elevation. And it ties also directly to other of the fundamental themes, such as addresses, buildings, functional areas, which common geographies are listed in, and land parcels. And then indirectly through many of the other themes, such as geographic names. And the specificity that we apply to the geocodes, so the accuracy and precision, the more specificity a nation or data user applies, the more flexibility you have in aggregating data to various geographic areas, and re-aggregating as needed in your microdata. So even if you're not outputting it at that specificity like most of us, it gives you the flexibility of connecting data through more geographic areas and more accurately. So that's really it at this point. I'll be around for questions, but we plan to keep working on this, refining and tying it to more national examples, and get more specificity and practical guidance, and tying it to the integrated geospatial information framework, especially strategic pathway for data. Please let me know if you have any additional questions at the end of the presentation. Thank you. I'll hand it over, I think, to Peter.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Peter Murphy. I'm Chief of Geographic Concepts and Areas at StatsCan. My involvement with UN-GGIM goes back to 2018, and more specifically to this work stream to 2019. So today I'll just touch on really four things. And this is these are elements that you'll see in the GSGF document itself and the draft implementation guide. So just to begin here, there are the guide and the GSGF document essentially describe three types of geographic areas that have been described as the common geographies. I won't go through them today, but I'll just they're actually listed there. Essentially, so there's the administrative, the statistical, and more currently the gridded approach. The other theme under how best to describe common geographies is that in adopting these geographies and maintaining them, and essentially evaluating new approaches or new geographic areas to potentially implement, is that these geographic areas enable a statistical system to produce information that would be useful for all a wider range of stakeholders. I'll just leave it at that. The other thing I thought I'd mention is that common geographies doesn't mean that if we, as new approaches emerge, that existing geographic areas, particularly for national statistical agencies, doesn't mean that that current or existing geographic areas should be abandoned. And in fact, common theme in the work with UN-GGIM is that country-specific dissemination geographies should be retained, and any new approaches should be viewed as congruent and adjunct. The other thing that is a common theme in this work stream, and you'll see in the documentation, is that this principle, the common geographies are essentially necessary to meet certain requirements, and as we'll hear later on today, and as those that have participating in UN-GGIM initiatives and indeed other initiatives, there are certain commitments and for most of us, if not all of us, with regards to, for instance, our own censuses, and of course the SDG development goals, the 2030 goals. The other I would say would be, and again, we may see some examples later today, and of course, most of us have lived through it with our own agencies, is the emerging challenges that when common geographies are adopted and maintained, and common geographies are potentially or new emerging approaches to common geographies are evaluated and used, that too adds to the capacity to provide information and output. And of course, the current example would be the COVID-19 pandemic. Not only the emergence of it, but the progress of the pandemic, and of course, the current work and the current activities among our countries to respond to the recovery to the pandemic, and indeed maybe in fact increasing infrastructure. The last thing I'll mention is that future work, similar to the geocoding, will be essentially consist of two pushes, if you will, to identify use cases of common geographies, in particular use cases that could be added to the implementation guide to better explain what common geographies are, what the advantages and potentially disadvantages of certain types of common geographies would be for countries who are seeking to adopt the GSGF, or to improve their capacity where capacity is today, if you will. And then lastly, to further the work to ensure that that this theme ties into the IGIF, or the Integrated Geospatial Framework, which again we'll be discussing later on today. So that's about all I have to say. I'll be attending the rest of the day or the morning to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Thank you very much. On the work, the task team on privacy and confidentiality, we have looked at several issues in terms of guidance, and what we've submitted really contextualizes the modern needs of statistical offices and geospatial agencies in fostering interoperability, privacy and confidentiality when advancing their work, their use of geospatial enabled statistical data. So the The guidance discusses types of data disclosures, as you may be experts in those areas, issues of identity disclosures, issues of attribute disclosure, and inferential disclosure when it relates to privacy and confidentiality. Then the guidance also summarizes the current state of relevant academic literature and highlights good practices in privacy and confidentiality. We have also a section on the terminology of the integration of statistical and geospatial information, which proposes an agreed initial set of definitions of key concepts to help share knowledge of existing terminologies and practices and align the description of concepts in order to reach a common understanding among representatives of statistical and geospatial communities. So because the guidance is now accessible, it's available. You can look at our scoping papers on this particular topic, scoping paper on geocoding, scoping paper on common geographies, and even a highlight on the global survey. And then we have also national examples. So you can move on to the next slide. Now, in terms of national examples, in the draft guidance, as I indicated, we have a request. We have invited member states to submit how the GSGF has been implemented and operationalized along three main areas of interest. One, we wanted to look at the overall implementation of the GSGF at member state level. And two, the implementation of the principles of the GSGF, different principles, which are like geocoding, common geographies, and task teams and work streams that we've formulated. And then we also wanted to look at how the GSGF is being used in terms of COVID response. How has the GSGF supported the national response to COVID? How would the GSGF have supported the national response to COVID-19 if it had been implemented? And what were the barriers in terms of implementation? So we received 29 responses from the listed countries, and we are still calling upon member states to continue submitting their examples to strengthen the implementation guide. Remember, the finalized version is expected to be submitted to the 53rd UN Statistical Commission. So we also received further responses from GGIM Africa and GGIM Americas, offered their regional perspectives as case studies. And we want to really thank the two bodies for having responded, and we urge the others to follow suit. Next. Lastly, is just to highlight our work plan in terms of the road ahead. We are looking at, after GGIM 11 this week or next week, we are looking at the 53rd Statistical Commission. So for the next 6 months, we want to finalize a global survey on the readiness of implementation of the spatial GSGF, and we urge those member states to continue providing their responses. We want to also finalize the implementation guide, incorporate all the comments from the committee that we are going to receive, strengthen the interlinkages between the GSGF and the IGIF. I think you've heard now the mention in terms of the strategic pathway data. We are saying the means to implement the GSGF is the integrated geospatial information framework. That is the means to implement the GSGF. So we want to also highlight case studies already provided by through national examples, national experiences. So we want to finalize that implementation guide. And then beyond that, we want to also develop a new work plan for 2022-2024. Then the coordination meetings with our regional stakeholders is indicated. The next meeting is in November, where we are going to meet with our regional stakeholders again to further the work of the expert group. So with this, I want to, unless if there are questions, I want to invite questions, but I see our time is not with us. Thank you very much.
Thank you for that, Alex. And if there are any questions, please put them in the chat or raise your hands. If not, I'm sure that we can get the next slides for the Central American project loaded up. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Gabriela Seco, and I will be the moderator during this session. Many thanks to the UN-GGIM Secretariat for allowing us to present the project titled United Nations Regional Committee on Global Geospatial Information Management for the Americas, Integration of Statistical and Geospatial Information in Central America. The format of our presentation is a roundtable in which each speaker will answer a specific question. First, we have Mrs. Gida Handel, General Director of Cartography and Geography of the Property Institute from Honduras. And the question is, could you please give us an overview of the Central America project, and could you share what were some of the obstacles and challenges faced with the acquisition and availability of data variables for the project? The floor is yours, Gida.
Good morning, everyone. I am going to present an overview of the Central America Statistical and Geospatial Information Project. We focus our work on Vulnerability Index COVID-19 pandemic response. During the 9th session of the United Nations Committee of Experts on Global Geospatial Information Management, we were excited to attend a side event led by the United States Census Bureau and INEGI of Mexico. We learned about a PAGE-sponsored project to integrate statistical and geospatial data in Central America. During the side event, we discovered the purpose, goals, and what the big impacts of this project will be for us. We recognized the importance, the necessity, and the benefits of learning how to do this, and we were optimistic about giving the best of our efforts to accomplish this new task as a region. We started having meetings virtually immediately after the 9th session and began preparing our next steps, such as exploring our data and developing an understanding of how our data was structured, how we were going to put it together, and most importantly, if we had the data available. Soon our worries arose as we started a comparison of data between the countries, realizing that we have so little data available and asking ourselves, are we really going to make this project possible? Are we going to be able to gather the necessary information and data needed? We had our doubts, but we continued our first steps by describing the levels of geography of each of our countries and understanding the lowest levels of geography for which data will be shared and used to tabulate statistical data, and to understand the types of statistical data that were available for aggregation. Among the first tasks were for each country to provide 6 levels of geography, define each level of geography, identify if the geography is administrative or statistical, provide a map of each level of geography, provide the nesting relationship of each level of geography, and the information on the statistical data that may be available for each level of geography. But by March of 2020, the pandemic had hit the world and we were kept in our homes. With the advent of the COVID-19 pandemic, the technical project team made the decisions to focus on how could we assist decision makers in Central America with their responses to COVID-19. Building on the work of DANE's development of a vulnerability index for Colombia, the technical project team began working the development of a vulnerability index for each of the Central American countries. Then we began to compile information about comorbidities, adult population, overcrowding, population density, intergenerational risk, and age data such as population over 60. Practical workshop sessions were held in which we learned the scope for the index, the adaptation of the methodology, calculations, and the limitations for each country. As we started defining the desegregation of the data and started gathering information, we realized how challenging this would be, as nobody understood how this virus worked, which people it was going to affect, how we could prevent it, and what challenges we were going to face. So all these worries and what the results will be enroll us in this experience. The Vulnerability Index has been generated from the identification and prioritization of these variables. Population over 60 years and older, homes without water service, housing with sanitation problems, overcrowded housing, diseases associated with diabetes mellitus, cancer-associated diseases, diseases associated with hypertension, diseases associated with ischemic heart disease. For the departmental and municipal administrative levels, the input crossings generated that have allowed the generation of the maps are the following. General Vulnerability Index map, Vulnerability Index plus 60 years range of diseases map, Vulnerability Index without water supply or sewerage connection map, Vulnerability Index plus 60 homes with overcrowded map. The Vulnerability Index is classified into 4 grades: medium, high, very high, and critical. Obstacles and challenges faced with the acquisition and availability of data variables for the project. And this was just the beginning of our regional experience. Throughout the process, we had problems from small obstacles to big challenges. We discussed every step, starting with the selection of topic, technical if people was accessible, technology, data available, health, infrastructure, hospital services, population, data acquisition, software, tools over the cloud, a platform for the region, index construction, formula, values, data processing. Institutional obstacles. We all realized that we were not prepared to provide statistics on the pandemic in the territory due to the lack of communications, gaps, and overlaps. And despite of all the obstacles, we must have focused on working as a region to have control of our territories. Some of us experienced during the pandemic lack of access to the institutions as they were closed. Some were just working with the minimum people. We could not get data, no access to data servers, and the ones that were working were not sharing any information because there was a fear, an atmosphere of the technology obstacles. There were several issues we faced, including internet access, computer access, adaptability to a new online GIS platform, understanding how to calculate the vulnerability index with our available data, integrating key data variables in preparation for running calculations and overcoming calculation errors. Many times it seemed that technology was not on our side because everything that we could think it will fail, failed. Data obstacles. Access to the data was difficult at the moment, but the most important challenge was what kind of data we had to get to accomplish the goal, and what data was available, and what we had to compile the index vulnerability. So our effort was beyond institutions and people that we work with. We collected some data basically by phone, as in the case of Honduras. Searching the internet and making phone calls was needed to complete the data for the index. Specifically, beds available in private hospitals, as we could not have access to data from private sector in our institutions. And also, it was interesting to know was that despite the fact that we have the numbers of people infected with the virus at the colony level, we could not share the data with the public, since this information at the moment generated discrimination conflicts among the inhabitants of the same community. Joint work carried out by the Central American countries. The main goal was to create a vulnerability index for the pandemic, and we are very excited that we did it. We succeeded, and the results obtained were quite similar in the region, and we can name some relevant ones that reflect the analysis of the vulnerability index. The first results we obtained at the second administrative level, in which it was observed that the lack of access to water and sewage and sanitation influence the number of infections in people in general. As we continue to analyze at this second administrative level, it was also determined that the most affected people are people over 60 years of age with associated diseases, and if they were living in overcrowded main cities, they were more vulnerable to contracting the virus. When we compare the results at the third administrative level, the data obtained regarding the vulnerable population is confirmed, and the cities that should improve the infrastructure regarding access to water and sanitary sewage are clearly identified in the territory, and the more emphasis is placed on homogeneous areas that have deficiencies. We can say that they are coincidentally the areas where it is necessary to improve the road infrastructure. The results obtained were precise thanks to this tool, and for decision makers is a big support for strategic decision making and better management of resources to benefit the population, as well as allowing the generation of a new land planning policies for both the central government and the local governments. These results became inputs that aim to support decision-making based on geostatistical data for the attention of the country's population and for strategies making. What benefits we got? A dashboard for an easy territory analysis, a public tool for easy data access, effective communication to the population about their territory and needs, reports about changes in the territory by municipalities in a timely manner, proper management of resources, manual for vulnerability index calculations, know the most vulnerable geographic and social areas, knowledge for future integration projects, institutions and countries collaboration and support, information available for stakeholders. And all this effort wouldn't be possible without the support of the institutions involved. Many thanks to Pan American Institute of Geography and History, United States Census Bureau, UN-GGIM Americas, DANE, Economic Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean, a Statistical and Geospatial Framework for the Americas, and INEGI. Thank you all.
Thank you very much, Gida. You shared a very complete and clear overview of this project. Now I am going to ask Mr. Edgar Donis, coordinator of the Vital Statistics Unit of the Department of Epidemiology of the Ministry of Public Health and Social Assistance in Guatemala. And the question is, could you please tell us how was the cooperation, collaboration, and institutional coordination between national statistical offices, national geospatial information agencies, health ministries, and other relevant stakeholders to support this integration project, especially given the difficulties that the global COVID pandemic presented? How has this project impacted the future of integrating spatial and statistical data for future use in your country? Will this now enable continued integration, development of partnerships, coordination, and collaboration to assist and inform decision makers within your country and the region? The floor is yours, Edgar.
From the first confirmed case of COVID-19 that appeared in March 2020, it was established with the authorities of the different institutions and project coordinators the issue to be carried out and the mechanism by which the interinstitutional integration of Guatemala Group will be communicated to them. Geostatistics, the president of the National Section of Guatemala and secretary of National Section of the Pan American Institute of Geography and History, officially requested the appointment of a representative or focal point to assist with the information and development process of the different products of the project. The select institutions were the National Institute of Statistics and the Ministry of Public Health and Social Assistance. Therefore, appointments were made to publicize the content, scopes, and objectives of the project, including since then in virtual meetings, the Geography Institute of Guatemala being the member of the national representative, jointly collaborating in the process and integration of the information. From the geography database with the National Statistical Institute, the demographic data, and from the Ministry of Health that contribute the data of the select comorbidities and thus. Having all the pieces joined, the calculation of the vulnerability index was finally carried out. This entire process has been developed and conducted virtually since the beginning of the project, due to the restrictions and period of confinement that have been had in Guatemala due to the government regulations and protections measures. This has fact that none of the members meet in person. The integration of these variables will have a positive impact of the different authorities that will have access to these indicators when they want to use it for the different contingency plans, prevention plans, and care plans for geographic areas that show the greatest vulnerability, COVID-19, and any other pathology that we would like to calculate since, due to different geographical and demographic situations, economic aspects, population range, overcrowding, and housing. It is possible to measure the vulnerability and the population according to its location. The project has come to reinforce the integration of spatial and statistical data, having reflected much of that in the execution and realization of the dashboard and history map, but we consider that it is worth communicating to decision makers of the existence of this entire project, since despite having designated a direct contact, they are not aware of the work, effort, importance, and time invested to get to where we are today. Cooperation and coordination between geospatial, statistical, and health institutions will be crucial for the generation of knowledge required by decision makers to effectively address the problems and needs of the population.
Thank you very much, Edgar, for your interesting response. Our third speaker, Mrs. Isis Tejada, head of the National Center for Special Data of the National Geographic Institute, Tommy Guardia from Panama. The question for you is, could you tell us some of the important lessons that you have learned from the integration of statistical and geospatial information, and if the results of the Vulnerability Index are a useful tool for decision makers in your country? The floor is yours, Isis.
Panama began its participation in this project thanks to the invitation of UN-GGIM, America's and Pan American Institute of Geography and History. The project was carried out with a view to supporting Central American countries in strengthening data integration management. Even though MEGA project provided reliable experience, there were several challenges that needed to be addressed during the development of this project. The collection of information, its processing, analysis, and presentation of results. These conditions were overcome thanks to some excellent teamwork. This project developed an innovative and efficient methodology of collaborative data collection and teamwork essential to achieve the project objectives. This approach was a major departure from the traditional methodology. Many lessons were learned by Panama in statistical and geospatial information integration, among which the following may be highlighted. First, the rapprochement between data-producing agencies. Although Panama has a data infrastructure that allows for interaction between different institutions, this project has led us to work collaboratively in a much closer way, a fact that we can replicate within our spatial data infrastructure. Second, the methodology used plays a very important role, as it allows us to replicate and apply this to other instances and projects, such as the indicators of the 2030 Agenda, focus on social aspects, education, and economy, among others. Third, along the same lines, the methodology is adaptable and can be easily built upon. Fourth, the contributions and experience of the fraternal countries in Central America have strengthened technical ties and allow feedback through mutual learning. Fifth, we have been led to redefine the consumption of data and the way in which it is arranged on state platforms. Sixth, considerable time was invested in collecting and organizing the data for this project, since it came from different sources and in different formats. We have found that as users, it is difficult to access this data, not only from statistical data agencies, but also from geospatial ones, which is leading us to rethink the structure of our geospatial and statistical platforms. And seventh, we believe it is essential to apply the implementations in reference to the integrated Geospatial Information Framework, or IGIF, and the Global Statistical Geospatial Framework, or GSGF, prepared by the Expert Committee on Global Geospatial Information Management. This could solve many of the data availability situations in Panama. As for whether the results of the Vulnerability Index are a useful tool for decision makers in our country, to provide readily response to potential risk, threats, or disaster, it is important to count with information on the level of vulnerability of key factors like social, economy, or environmental issues. It is essential to prepare possible scenarios with the purpose of create strategies and planning to counteract any negative effect of these aspects, as it has been the case of the recent health issues in the area. In this sense, we are proposing the use of this tool to the Sustainable Development Goals Monitoring Office, or the Social Cabinet in Panama. Regarding this, it should be noted that the dissemination of the tool is very necessary. It is imperative to point out that this instrument can go hand in hand with development and planning process such as the goals of the SDGs, and also that is transmittable to other situations. We are totally convinced that this is a very useful tool in any field that is applied to it.
Thank you very much, Isis, for this clear and complete response. The next question is for Mr. Maruc Muñoz, Head of Special Data Department of the General Directorate of Statistics and Censuses from El Salvador. And the question is, was the use of a data structure useful to ensure data interoperability for the project? And please tell us, did your work on this project improve your data management skills? The floor is yours, Maruc.
Hello, everyone. Christopher Maruc Muñoz from El Salvador is speaking. My answer is the following. Yes, having a data structure was of great help to be able to identify, standardize, classify, and make requests for the variables of interest to the government institutions that are owners of said information due to the nature of their functions. It also facilitated the processing of subsequent calculations of the Vulnerability Index from Notebook within the ARGIS Online platform. Having a defined data structure allowed all the countries of the region to standardize each of the fields within the model. As a country, within the Geographic Institute, we have some experiences in the creation of geographic data structures, always focused on the creation of cartography at different scales, but we have never interacted in the calculation of an indicator from the technology provided by ARGIS Online, which is a very valuable learning experience, which will help us in future projects that involve the task we do. The process of obtaining data for our country was difficult due to the lack of data integration in key institutions. As a country, we do not have a special data infrastructure, so government institutions do not have the habit of sharing information and efforts to collect data that are useful to respond to any phenomenon. The existence of special data infrastructure is a strategic advantage for any government or entity because it allows data analysis, the timely creation of public policies, and the correct participation of state together with civil society to give prompt, effective responses and proportionate. Within the project, El Salvador only has statistical data for level 2 departments, which is why we were unable to calculate the vulnerability index for COVID-19 with greater geographic accuracy. This is because we used the Household National Survey as a main source data, which only covers the second geographic level. On the other hand, last population census was made on 2007 and didn't contain some of the key variables needed for this project. Then, this is how our vulnerability index map looks like. As we can see, the lower index values in lighter. And we built the dashboard showing the vulnerability index map and some variables like population density, poverty, and others. And that's all. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maruk, for your response. Finally, the last question is for Eduardo Sancho, coordinator of the Quality Control and Geospatial Regulation sub-process of the National Geographic Institute from Costa Rica. The question for you is, did you learn anything from the different methods of visualizing the results of the project, dashboards, web maps, and story maps? The floor is yours.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. An important objective of this integration project was to find creative and innovative methods to visualize the results of our work. We have chosen to visualize the results of our project by utilizing ELRI web maps, dashboard, and history maps. The use of and representation of the results of our project, the calculation of the vulnerability index through the use of web maps allow us to have a very clear picture of the reality of the country in terms of the degree of vulnerability for each of its level of spatial disaggregation. In the case of Costa Rica, we are divided in a second level by provincias, followed by cantones, and ending with the districts that represent the smallest geospatial unit. This unit, in my opinion, represent the closest image to real situation of the country, while the others show a generality in the larger spatial units. It is important to highlight the use of the degree of vulnerability and which are represented of the map by means of color degradation, where the darkest are indicate the territorial units with the highest vulnerability, give us a very clear idea of the behavior throughout each country. Below is an image with the result of the web map of their level of disaggregation of the country, known as cantones. The use of dashboard for each level of territorial disaggregation allows us to visualize and interrelate the web maps with charts and graphs, the latter showing the behavior of the main variables used to calculate the vulnerability index. The dynamic and interactive graphics with the maps also allow us to spatial zoom in on the most problematic cases of variables, such as accessibility to drinking water, accessibility to public sewage, overcrowded houses, among others, and their location on the corresponding map according to the territorial division they represent. The dynamic tables with health risk factor or comorbidities also allow us to interrelate the result with their spatial location on the map. In the following image, you can see examples of dashboards by level and their composition in maps, charts, and graphs. The use of story maps allow us to tell the story of the project. the methodology used by the developer of the project, the data structure table with the variables used by each country and the date of their data, the analysis of the results obtained for each level of disaggregation, the usefulness of the results for the decision makers with each country, as well as the relationship between the results obtained with the vulnerability index calculation and the actual situation present within the country to the COVID-19 pandemic. In Costa Rica's case, we include a brief historical geographical review of the country, which is very important to understand the context and behavior of some of the variables that are undoubtedly closely related to the location and concentration of the population in certain areas and which are directly linked to the historical development of the country and the certain geographical and climatic conditions that favor the allocation of population more in some regions of the country than in others. The story maps also allow us to link the entire development of COVID-19 pandemic, such as statistical regarding infection, recoveries, deaths, impact mitigation campaigns, and vaccination process from the geographical point of view and the main political and administrative actors. In this case, the Costa Rica Social Security Fund, the Ministry of Health, and the National Emergency Commission, who represent the main axis in the management and containment of pandemic in the case of Costa Rica. The image below given a brief overview of the parts, results, and components of the project published in the story map tools. All these forms of data visualization and representation allow us to have at our disposal visual and graphic tools that are easy to use and help us to understand the different forms that vulnerability acquires at a spatial level. And it will undoubtedly be a very useful way for planning and mitigation actions in the political effort responsible for the administration of public service and access to housing, for example. The only question that remains is how much commitment do we have from the authorities and if there is the national budget to solve the most delicate situation that this project shows through the different forms of representation of the results. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much to all of the participants for your interventions. And now I give the floor to Mark. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gabriela. If you just bear with us for a brief second while we prepare and hand over to the co-chairs of the working group on geospatial and geospatial information of the IAEG-SDGs, that'd be great. But thank you very much. We really appreciate it. And again, if there are any questions, please put them into the chat. And Paloma Celine, you should have the ability to share your screens, turn your cameras on, and hand over the floor to yourselves to go through the SDGs Geospatial Roadmap. Thank you. And Paloma, I believe you're muted. I apologize.
Sorry, hello. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all of you. I'm really glad to be here. This is a side event that has a lot of topics close to my heart, the IGIF, which we used to co-chair, and congratulations to Alex and Catherine for the advancements in the implementation of the IGIF. Also, I'm very glad to see the Central America project results and what all of these countries have achieved. Congratulations to you all for having this vibrant community that is working in this vulnerability index. I think it's been great to see some of the results and the progress you've done so far. And and now we come to the third part of this side event, where we're going to talk about the Geospatial Roadmap. This is part of the work of the Working Group on Geospatial Information. And we would like to share with you in advance what the roadmap looks like. I mean, we will discuss this further in the session, in the 11th session of UN-GGIM. But today, we want to give you a brief overview of what the WGGI has been working on, this Geospatial Roadmap, which is intended to guide the work of geospatial information for the WGGI. So Celine, my colleague, will guide you. So Celine, I see your camera on. Good morning. Please go ahead with the presentation.
Thank you, Paloma. Hello, everyone. So I'll share my screen and give you an overview of the roadmap. I hope you can see correctly my screen. So if not, please tell me. I have also shared within the chat the link of this presentation, because it's an online interactive presentation, and also of the printed document of the SDG Geospatial Roadmap. So thank you very much for being here today. I'll give a brief overview of the SDG Geospatial Roadmap in its current version. It's a printed document we have shared in the page of this session, and you can explore it at this moment and also after the event. And it will also be an interactive web document planned to evolve over time, integrating new resources, new knowledge, methodology developed by all the community. I have made this presentation also as an interactive web document in order to give an idea of how the roadmap will be viewed in its future version compared to the printed document. So first at all, why this roadmap was created and how to use it? So the vision of the roadmap is to see geospatial and location-based information being recognized and accepted as official data for the SDG, and includes key strategic messages and facts. And it builds the bridge between statistical and geospatial actors working within the global indicators framework. It can also be seen as a guide to help national statistic officers to think through how to overcome some of the key barriers to integrate geospatial information in their development monitoring efforts. So I'll give now a little background of the process that we conducted to achieve this document. It's because it's a result of more than a year of collaborative work within the working group of geospatial information of the interagency and expert group of SDG indicators. All the member states, custodian agencies, and experts have participated in this development of the structure and discussion, and also the content. So it's important to highlight that this roadmap pretends to give comprehensive support to countries that are in very different stages in their development or their measurements. So the identification of conditions and obstacles to the integration of geospatial information to the measurement strategy, as well as the pathway to long-term solutions, was part of the challenges of this work. We can briefly see the timeline of this development. We started in March 2020, last year, agreeing within the working group on the roadmap structure, so in 3 phases. The first one is prepare and plan. The second is design, development and testing. And the third is producing, measuring, monitoring and reporting geospatially enables SDG indicators. We developed a collective drafting of key ideas and the key questions to conduct the consultation stage during the first quarter of one. We organized an extensive consultation stage, trying to chat in reduced groups with all the countries represented in the working group and the IAEG countries member through 8 sessions in several languages. And posteriorly, sessions with regional commissions, SDG custodian agencies, and other experts. We share today, so we are in August 2021, we share an advanced draft of the Geospatial Roadmap for its last consultation stage with all of you. For your comments, guidance, and our last objective, finally, in March 2022, when the IAEG-SDGs would submit the roadmap to the 53rd Statistical Commission for its adoption. So I'd like to elaborate a little more on the consultation methodology, because it is, we think it is a qualitative dimension that can be considered added value of this work. It really seeks to understand and assimilate the difficulties of countries to develop their measurement strategy. So we needed to understand the right issues. Most of the time, these issues are structural issues to identify useful solutions. So we invited to informal conversations representative of NSOs, but also their technical teams to share their approaches, concerns, and both high-level and practical visions. We formed small groups with no more than 6 people in 3 languages, Spanish, English, and French, to chat around the guiding questions developed collaboratively within the group. Around the phases and these key questions. So then all the notes were translated into English and reorganized within the phases, the 3 phases, categorized. We can so we can see here an overview of the Miro board we made, because we wanted to take the notes during the conversations to allow people to comment more deeper and also complement all the ideas commented during conversations. So it was organized in the 3 languages within the 3 phases and the guiding questions we can see here. So after that, translated into English, it was reorganized within phases and questions. We also coded all the ideas within the code color. If there were neutral ideas, obstacles and needs, and also ideas, actions and solutions, or general reflections, and also grouped around common topics. The systematization allowed to detect that the conversations turned around 3 main cross-cutting themes, so governance, access to technologies, and human capacities. So it was also at this first stage reorganized with these 3 cross-cutting themes and keeping the common themes, the common topics. And finally, this structure was used in the draft of the roadmap. So with this structure, I'll present the content of the roadmap. So it's structured with executive summary, an introduction, phase 1, 2, and 3, and a summary and call to action. Also annexes of main documents and main resources commented within the document. So a short section also explains how to use the roadmap as a guide. It presents some basic concepts we can see here. So what is geospatial information? What is Earth observation? what is disaggregation by geographic location, and it also emphasized on their importance for a better understanding of territorial dynamics and then the importance of their measurements. Each phase details a context and descriptive of main problems, a table of key actions, and in a third point, it gives orientation towards annexes, attached documents, URL to external resources, tools, methodology, etc. And it allows to countries to look at the resources depending on their status, their condition, and their needs. What are the key actions? Key actions are milestones for countries to enact to work towards the strengthening of their use of geospatial information for the SDGs. So I'll show briefly the 3 phases. You can see everything in the complete version in the printed document I have shared in the chat. But the phase 1 is about prepare and plan. So it helps to establish a foundation from which to use geospatial information for the development of SDGs indicators. It makes the relations, it shows the relations and agreements between national institutions determine the potential for access to data and results, as well as establishing the conditions for long-term monitoring. And it also insists on the skills in geospatial information management and analysis needed, and the ability to adapt methodologies and the ability to identify needs and solutions. So these are more structural challenges that this phase addressed through the key actions. So here I just show the title of the key actions, but you have the complete development in the printed document. So first action would be to establish a national committee to coordinate SDGs. A second action is to use the global fundamental geospatial data teams to identify national data capacity and data gaps. A third action is to work towards the implementation of guiding frameworks. A fourth action is to assess available skills, leverage regional platforms, establish partnerships with academia and other sectors to bridge the gap. The roadmap also show examples illustrated in boxes. So we have here, you can look at it here in the web document, but it's also shown better in the printed document. We have governance stories about Colombia, about Ireland. We also have 3 boxes about the use of non-conventional methods and non-conventional data to bridge data gap, with 2 specific examples on Ghana and on Mexico. The second phase about design, development and testing is about the identification of resources that help with assessing and deciding on which data, methods, gaps, issues and actions to implement to use geospatial information in the SDGs. The key actions are to identify key sources to prioritize data needs. The second is prioritize focus indicators based on national priorities. The third is to commit to convene workshops to promote the sharing of knowledge and experience with peers. The fourth action is to convene workshops with SDG custodian agencies to confirm appropriate data, resources and methods, and coordinate development support. And the fifth action is about collaborating with regional and global entities to leverage available capacities. We also have boxes in this phase about how to use geography and disaggregated data to ensure no one is left behind. And we also have a box on how to select geospatial information and its methodologies to produce, measure and monitor indicators with 4 steps. Use geospatial information when available. Define sources and determine correct integration methods. Identify the appropriate aspects of datasets. Identify relevant actions on the data selected. So we see that the roadmap is showing very practical orientation and also structural and governance resources. The third phase is about producing, measuring, monitoring and reporting geospatially enabled SDG indicators. So it gives support for the process of producing an indicator, its dissemination and reporting to continuously monitor progress. And it also, this phase also suggests an iterative way to return of and to question the methodological definitions and measurement strategy. So here the key actions are to develop and enact an SDG dissemination strategy, to implement a suitable SDG data management and dissemination platform, to promote a culture of storytelling with existing data and highlighting the existing data gaps, to establish a publication calendar identifying institutional areas responsible for monitoring the indicators, and to publish metadata and sources and continuously update the list of prioritized indicators. So here we also have examples through boxes with two practical development of indicators. So an example on Mexico's methodology for calculating the SDG 6.6.1. We have an end-to-end process for the indicators 15.4.2. And we also have a box on tools to make story maps. So how to make story maps, how is general guidings for that, and also specific tools, proprietary but free tools, and also open codes tools. Sorry. And we have several examples of story maps you can directly consult from this web interactive document. So finally, the roadmap is finishing with a call to action, which calls you to better harness the geospatial information for the measurement, monitoring, and reporting of geospatially related indicators, to disaggregate indicators by geographic location and combine with data disaggregated by several variables like income, sex, age, and others to help inform the measurements. We collectively have the tools and mechanisms that can enable the production and dissemination of high quality, timely and reliable data within our graphs to meet the goal 17. So the objectives of this roadmap is to gather all this knowledge, all this collective knowledge to help countries at different stages to better develop their strategy. And finally, geographic information is a key. We consider that is a key component that can highlight groups which are currently lagging behind, whether through disaggregation of the different variables and characteristic of population relevant in national contexts to leave no one behind. So this roadmap calls for geographical and geospatial and location-based information to now be recognized and accepted as official data for the SDGs alongside official statistics. So now I give you the floor for any comments you would like to give. Also, Paloma and Kevin, if you wish to complete any other aspects, you are welcome. And we also invite you to give your feedback to the document in the next weeks. It's as I said before, it's the last consultation process and stage we have. So your comments, guidance, also resource methodology you think that could be useful in the documents to be integrated will help us a lot to make the last version of this roadmap and to submit it. Thanks a lot. I give you the floor, Paloma.
Thank you, Celine, for the presentation. So we are now opening if you want to take the floor or use the chat to post your questions, please do so. As Celine said, this is meant to be a document that is live, that is, there's the link to the SWAY in the chat as well. So you can take a look, and we want to make this document something that is currently incorporating all the your comments and suggestions. I see that Kevin is here. Kevin, good evening or good afternoon for you. How are
Sorry.
you?
Hello,
Welcome.
Paloma. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening to everybody. Yeah, I just like to put my my IAG hat on here, if I may, because as everybody might know, I am the co-chair with Paloma of the WGGI. But from an IAG perspective, I think the development of this particular document is a very good exemplar of the interaction between the communities, because on a number of occasions, we've had the opportunity to brief the IAG. The WGGI, should I say, has had the opportunity to brief the IAG on the development of this roadmap, and also to work directly with the IAG members in terms of the meetings in the development of this particular roadmap that Celine has briefly discussed. So I feel that this is the beginning of the geospatial data really embedding itself into the statistical community. From my own personal perspective here in Ireland, we've been using what we've described here in really important work on both the SDGs, but even more important recently, which is the COVID-19. So we've been able to produce national portals using the references that you have here in this particular roadmap. And as I said, Irish example is there for people to follow. So I would feel that certainly this particular type of document is certainly the bridge that has been discussed between the two communities, and it certainly will allow geospatial data to become embedded within the statistical frameworks. I may also mention that from a UN-ECE, modernization of official statistics work, myself and Mark have been working with that particular group on geospatial integration. And what we have done on that is to link the GSGF and the GSBPM, which is the statistical business models, together. So that is a good piece of work. Yet again, it fits in this particular framework about bringing the two communities together. So I would say is well done, and thank you very much for your time.
Great, thank you, Kevin. So I mean, I also want to take this opportunity to thank everyone that collaborated with this roadmap. As Celine showed in the Amiro board, this was made through a series of informal conversations with IAG members, WGGI members. So we really tried to capture all the perspectives. There was several meetings with different, I mean, in different languages, with different communities in different time zones, trying to capture all of that in this, what is supposed to be a very succinct document, that we don't want this to be a long thesis that no one reads. We want this to be a short document that is easy to read, but that can have the links for further discussion and to go into deep I mean, into all of the information that it's need to know in case someone needs. But at the, as Kevin was saying, this is made to make that geospatial community closer to the statistical community and to those that are monitoring and reporting the SDGs. I see a question in the chat, which is, Kevin, is there a link to the statistical business model document? So yeah, I think someone has already put it in the chat for you, Andrew, so you can take a look. Okay, so if there are no more questions, Mark, over to you. Thank you all for your time, and I think we still have one more conversation to go in this side event.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Paloma, and thank you very much to Celine and Kevin for their interventions, and especially Celine for the presentation. At this point, I think it would make sense for us to hand over to our last segment of this session, which is by DANE, Colombia, and IBGE in Brazil. So Camilo, I hand over the floor to yourselves, and then if you let us know on who to make the presenters, we'd very much appreciate that. Thank you.
Good morning to everyone. My name is Horacio Castellano from UN-GGIM, the Economic, Commission for Latin America and the Caribbean based in Santiago de Chile. It is a pleasure for me to be here. I will moderate the next session on behalf of Álvaro Bonet, who couldn't attend this event, and send kind regards, especially for our next speakers. The subject of this session is the use of alternative sources and techniques for the integration of statistical and geospatial information. We will count with the participation of representatives from the National Statistical Offices of Brazil and Colombia. The convergence between statistical and geospatial information has been revitalized as a fundamental strategy to fulfill and monitor the commitment of states with global, regional, and national agendas. This convergence enables to gather in real time large volumes and detailed data on social, economic, and environmental aspects produced by alternative sources and formats. In the midst of this process, it is needed to prioritize the opportunities that arise, not only from accessing and integrating this data, but also from exploring techniques to design and produce information based on the use of technologies such as big data, data science, machine learning, Earth observation, among others, in order to support public policies and decision making. In this sense, Colombia and Brazil National Statistical Offices will share their new experiences in the use of novel sources and techniques that support the integration of statistical and geospatial information to address global, regional, and national challenges, while strengthening the capacity and cooperation between the entities and organizations that produce geospatially enabled statistical data. So next, I will present Juan Daniel Oviedo, General Director of the Colombian National Administrative Department of Statistics, DANE. So Juan Daniel Oviedo, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Horacio. I would like to ask if it's possible to share my screen, because I made some slight changes to this presentation that is currently on the screen. I'm very happy to join this side event. I want to say hello to all the former discussants, more particularly to Alex and to Gabriela, Gida, Edgar, Isis, Maruk, Eduardo, and especially to Paloma and Mark, because I just wanted to highlight that the GGIM has performed very, very important advances that I feel that there is a strong framework that is going to allow the continuous interaction of statistical information and geospatial information, something which is very, very sound for the implementation of the 2030 agenda, and more importantly, to make our citizens accountable about the sustainable development goals, because something that has been proven from the experience, but also from the theory, is that the intersection between statistical information and geospatial information is highly relevant, not only to facilitate the dissemination of information or the accessibility of information, but also the empowerment of this information on the head of our citizens that are going to understand, or to better understand, what development means when they see the indicators and they see the metrics which are closer to the context where they live, or in the cities where they work, or in the countries that they inhabit, in all the global agenda of the 2030 social development and sustainable development agenda. In Colombia, we wanted to share with you some experiences in order to put into practice what's happening between the use of alternative sources of information in order to integrate statistical and geospatial information. There, we have two main topics that we would like to insist in this conversation of 15 minutes, or in that we would 10 minutes, I'm sorry, that we wanted to share with you some, which are the principles that probably I'm going to be redundant because the principles are very clear from the GGIM. And at the same time, what we wanted to show or share with you are some ample experiences of integration of alternative sources of information that put into practice the integration and the power of the integration of statistical and geospatial information. As you know, there are some foundations that we closely follow from the GGIM, under which, taking into account the use of geospatial infrastructure and geocoding, we are going to allow the keys, or we are going to develop the enablers or the interaction of the statistical information that we currently produce in the National Statistics Office with the availability of geospatial information that we have, for example, in the information sector in Colombia, that is composed by the Geographic Institute Agustín Codazzi and the National Statistics Office, which is called DANE in Colombia. But taking into account the possibility of integrate statistical information and geospatial information from the foundation, from the codes, and from the production of the statistical and the geospatial or geographic information, we want this information to be accessible and to be used for several stakeholders in our society, not only for the government, but more importantly for the local government that are going to be able to understand how local development performs in several sectors of our country, but at the same time to empower our citizens in order to be conscious that local development requires differential approaches and what we call in Colombia territorial or subnational approaches of development in our country. Following these principles of the GGIM, in Colombia, we wanted to highlight 6 key aspects that are around the integration of statistical and geospatial information. More importantly, we want to insist in 2 of these 6 key aspects under which we need to allow the integration of geospatial and statistical information to empower or to facilitate the measure and the monitoring activities that our policymakers require of the Sustainable Development Goals and the 2030 Agenda. But at the same time, we are concerned as a National Statistics Office that this integration of geospatial and statistical information should or must empower local decisions are more and should allow diverse socioeconomic discussions or socioeconomic models in such an heterogeneous country as Colombia that you probably may know in the past or in the present. There are some issues that are going to be at the stake in this integration of geospatial and statistical information in order to facilitate the development goals, measurement, and the 2030 agenda monitoring in our country. And there, the Directorate of Geospatial Information in the National Statistics Office, at the head of Sandra Moreno, was very, very innovative in the use and the exploitation of Earth observations in order to advance alternative metrics in order to measure some sustainable development goals, some cases that we are going to share in the future. But this innovative approach Also empowered that the input that sometimes is concerned about the geospatial information for a statistical purpose was not only an input for the success of the statistical operations in the National Statistics Office, but was also a means in order to empower and to make the statistical information that we produce more effective and closer to our stakeholders or closer to our users. Some specific cases that we wanted to share with you, taking into account the leadership of the Directorate of Geospatial Information at the National Statistics Office and several agencies that are part of this project, under which international cooperation has been very significant in order to empower these kinds of exercises. We wanted to share several examples of measurement of sustainable development goals that are using alternative sources of information and are at the stage of the integration of geospatial and statistical information. The first example that we wanted to share with you is how we are starting to measure in Colombia multidimensional poverty, taking advantage of satellite imagery that is going to allow some granular measurements of multidimensional poverty, more importantly in rural areas and very isolated areas of our country that probably are not subject to a continuous surveys, for example, the living standard surveys that we continuously perform in Colombia. So taking into account that the international agenda of measurement of multidimensional poverty from alternative sources has performed very strong developments in Asia and Africa, we started to learn how to take advantage of satellite imagery in order to approximate the measurement of multidimensional poverty for the rural areas and the isolated areas of our countries that have a very special priority in our public policy because they are inhabited by ethnical population, and at the same time is where we know from the scratch that we are going to face a more intense levels of poverty in the inhabitants that we are going to consider in this measurement. That's why, taking into account some experiences of Bangladesh, Ghana, and Uganda, we managed to take advantage of some sentinel imagery and at the same time some models of nighttime light intensity and daytime light intensity that allowed our country to start from this measurement of multidimensional poverty at a state level, what we call departments in Colombia, at a subnational level, something that we are able to infer from the Living Standard Survey, to take advantage of the geospatial properties or the georeferenced properties of the population and housing census that we performed in 2018 in order to arrive to a municipality level multidimensional poverty measurement. But this municipality level that we started to infer from the population and housing census did not allow to take into consideration what was happening in rural areas in the more isolated regions of our country. That's why taking advantage of the integration of geospatial information, more specifically satellite imagery, with some large databases that we have from the population census, infrastructure databases that we have in our country, we managed to develop a convolutional neural network that from machine learning started to make inference about the multidimensional poverty measures for rural sections in the more isolated areas of our country, something that is going to be tremendously important in the targeting of public policy in order to provide public services and to allow this population of our country to fight poverty and to come out to a social and equitable agenda in our country. Some other examples, in order not to be so long in the presentation, are linked to specific measures of some sustainable development goals. For example, the indicator 911, which is called the proportion of rural population living within 2 kilometers of a road that is passable all year round. We are integrating the information of the two entities that conform the information sector in our government, which is the National Statistics Office, which performs the National Population and Housing Census, and the official cartography from the Geographic Institute, which is the Agustín Codazzi Institute, that taking advantage of these two sources of information, we managed to set which are the year-round roads in our country, to develop or to take advantage of the World Bank methodology for the Rural Accessibility Index, to perform some calculations of the area of influence of 2 kilometers from the previous results, and finally to have an intersection of the georeferenced dwellings that are inside this area in order to provide a calculation of this proportion of rural population that is living within 2 kilometers of our road, which is passable at year one. And this is something very important because we do not need to perform continuous surveys or to depend on a population census in order to have this development, because we are going to make this measurement to be continuous, taking into account the alternative uses of satellite imageries that we learned from the multidimensional poverty measurements. Another situation or another advance that we have performed in the measurement of indicator 11.3.1, which is the ratio of land consumption rate to population growth rate. Instead of depending on a population census, we are using satellite imagery for the determination of land consumption, and we are crossing this information with the population forecasts that the demographic directorate of our National Statistics Office has performed in order to have a continuous measurement of the 3-year-round satellite imagery with the continuous forecast that we are performing from the demographic directorate. And another example is the indicator 11.71, which is the average share of the built-up area of cities that is open space for public use for all, something that is linked to well-being of urban inhabitants in our country. And in order to develop an alternative measurement of this sustainable development goal, we are using satellite imagery to determine which is the built area in a specific urban area in our cities. And we are having access to open access sources as citizen-generated data, as OpenStreetMap, that we are going to cross with the georeference statistical information from the Housing and Population Census of 2018. And that's something very important that we just wanted to highlight in the presentation in order to conclude that the Population and Housing Census provided that had two keys: the identification number of the inhabitants, and at the same time, the geographic coordinates of every survey that was performed in the population census, is allowing this rich integration of information that, for example, allowed us to face an important challenge about ethical measurement that had some important problems related to people from African descent in the population and housing census. And more specifically, in order to go to the end of the pyramid, we want this information to be usable and accessible, and that's why, for example, we developed this ArcGIS Hub for the dissemination of SDG indicators, which is a geo portal that has been developed for the presentation of results through graphics and geo viewers that are going to make the citizens to be empowered with the use and the information that we are providing from the intersection of geospatial information and statistical information. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Juan Daniel Oviedo, for your presentation. You mentioned several innovative techniques, methodologies, and sources. Very interesting. Please remember, if you have any question, please leave it on the chat. Now I will present our next speaker, Claudio Stener. He is the Geosciences Director at the Brazilian Institute of Geography and Statistics, IBGE. I want to highlight the singularity of IBGE for the subject of this event. As you know, IBGE is both National Statistical Office and National Geospatial Agency. So, Claudio Stener, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and do this presentation. Mark, could you please allow me to share my screen?
That should do it for you, Claudio.
Thank you. I choose to talk with you in this presentation about one specific approach in the production of the statistical. The small area statistics is a big challenge in order to provide information to public policies. So to leave no one behind is essential to the success to SDG implementation. So it's necessary to we need the statistics for small areas to leave no one behind. So what's the challenge to achieve this goal? First, you have to produce geo-coded statistics, geo-reference statistics, preferred by coordinates or address, point statistics. So you have to develop methodologies to deal with positional errors, because you have statistical errors and you have also positional errors. So you have to construct a broad set of common geographies to meet different information needs. And also you need to create tools to allow the user to put the statistic in her their custom geographies. And also you have to ensure the statistical confidentiality. So this is our 5 principles that I'm very happy that these principles become very popular in all the institutes. It's very, very, very important principles in order to guarantee the integration between geography and the statistics. So let's talk about the production of georeference statistics. This is a real sample of experimental census in Brazil. In this image, it's possible to see the households in green, and also it's possible to see the census tract limits in blue, and the blocks in red. It's all the households are referenced, but it's possible to see in the image that the positional is not the real positional. It's this position is captured by GNSS device, and especially in the city, especially in the dense area cities, we don't have the sometimes the good window to sky in order to capture a good satellite signal. So the positional may vary a little. So after the capture the coordinates in the field, it's necessary to do another work in the offset to correct the disposition of these households. So even with this work in the offset later, some positionals will not be very accurate. So you have to develop methodologies to deal with these positional errors. Like we have the similar things with statistics when we talk about samples. Another thing that's very important to leave no one behind is to have a large broad of common geographies. It's a very important thing. In Brazil, you have a complete geographic framework that now we are improving and incorporate new geographies like watersheds and biomes and other kinds of geographies in order to improve our ability to analyze statistics. When we include the geography in the geographic framework, large areas are not a problem because we have enough precision to do this without problem. But when we talk about small geographies, we have another challenge. Especially, we have to think about the spatial error, the geographic positional error, and also you have to think about the confidentiality. That's very important. But you have to provide this small area information to the society. It's very important. So that's the challenge about privacy and confidentiality involving principle 5.2 and the principle 3 also, and how we can preserve the confidentiality and also show to the society small area statistics. That's the challenge we have to deal with. Some possible ways. These are work in progress, but we have to use blue techniques to show the information, the maps, without show the statistics. It's one way to provide this small area information to the society. And also you can use the handle variation in the statistics of small areas in order to prevent the information privacy from being exposed. And we are working very hard to build a set of minimal geography units, or maybe a combination of both methodologies. What's a minimal geographic unit? It's a fundamental building block for any aggregations in larger areas. Until 2010 census, this MGU is the census tract, but sometimes it's too big. You have to use the more precise geocoded information to provide statistics for smallest areas. Now you have 450,000 census tract in Brazil, but as I said, sometimes it's too big. This image shows the census tract and also the households inside the census tract. So the MGU, all the MGU will be subject to the confidentiality criterion. So you have to aggregate the census, the MGU without problem, without expose the confidentiality of the information. You can create much more units than census tract. It's possible to create about 10 million MGU in Brazil, and increase very much the capacity to generate statistics for small areas, guarantee the confidentiality. One advantage of the MGUs, for example, when you compare to the grid, that the MGU preserve the territory semantics. It's related to the real things in the territory. And also, it is a subset of the census tract. Imagine you have a census tract and divide it into small pieces and the small bricks to construct another geography. All other census disclosed geographies will be derived by these aggregations of MGUs. With this approach, it's impossible to expose the confidentiality of the data. The MGU has a variable geometry. It's not fixed. Why? Because when you have very basic data, like a total population, it's possible to create a smallest, very small MGU. But when you have when you cross a lot of information, the MGU has to be bigger than this one. That's why it has a variable geometry. MGU allow to create a web system, web app to allow user to extract custom geographies with statistics. It's one project that we're working in. And some special cases, it's possible to combine MGU approach with other approach like handling statistical variation. My final consideration, we have an increased demand for small area statistics. And also, we have improved geocoded statistical information. So we have an opportunity here. It's a clear opportunity. And also have a possible to web applications that allow to access statistical data in multiple geographies, including custom geographies. What you have to think it's how can you guarantee the statistical confidentiality? That's why we are working minimal geography units and also maybe statistical handling statistical variation to guarantee this goal and use this opportunity. That's it. Thank you very much.
Claudio Stenner, thank you for this great presentation and thanks for sharing the experience and the work in progress of the IBGE in this subject. We know there are still several gaps among countries to better address the potentialities in the use of alternative sources and techniques for the integration of statistical and geospatial information. The colleagues from Brazil and Colombia gave us excellent innovative examples in the way to close this gap. Well, I'm sorry, I'm afraid we don't have enough time for questions. So I would like to thank one more time to Claudio Stenner and Juan Oviedo for sharing their experience. And thank you very much. Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Horatio. I mean, given the content, if there are any questions, at this point, please unmute yourselves and ask them. We've got quite a lot of people still here. So, Horatio, please take questions from the floor if there are any. There's some very interesting presentations there from Colombia and Brazil. So thank you.
Thank you, Mark. So if you have any question, please raise your hand or maybe write it down on the chat, please.
I have a question, Horatio, for both of our speakers in this session. And the question is, when it comes to integrating statistical and geospatial information, how used is it outside the statistical office or outside the institution that is integrating it? Especially with those experimental approaches as outlined by Colombia. How can we mainstream those approaches? And what thoughts do they have on doing that? Thank you.
Juan Oviedo.
I can I can speak about Brazil. In our experience, you don't use outside information, only information from IBG, but we're planning to use outside information in other kinds of approach, like to calculate the accessibility of the population to health and educational service using census data, and the location of schools and the health facilities that are external outside information. That's it. And they're planning to integrate this information to calculate, in order to calculate this kind of information.
Thank you, Claudia. I've just got a note saying that Juan has unfortunately lost his connection, but he's trying to reconnect. So I see him in the room now.
Mark, I think we have some question from Kevin McCormack. Please, Kevin.
Thanks, everybody. Yeah, just on that point, in Ireland, we undertook an exercise in 2019, linking the census and our mapping agencies' data sets together for measuring distance to everyday services. And we have actually got that published. So as I said, it's actually pretty good. Sorry, just to close that door. So this is actually very, very useful, and it's been found to be very, very useful in Ireland. And I think that this approach is innovative and it's well worth doing. Thank you. Over.
Thank you, Kevin. Maybe Juan or Claudio want to answer this question, this comment?
I'm sorry, Horacio, but I had some connection problems, but I came back, but I didn't manage to hear completely the question from Kevin. Is it possible that you rephrase it in order to allow my answer?
Sorry, Juan, it wasn't really a question. It was just support of the approach that you're taking, just to highlight the fact that in Ireland, we had done something similar to this in 2019, and it's been very innovative and very, very well received. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Kevin. No, but what we believe is that this agenda of integration of geospatial information and statistical products is going to be transformative in order to allow the apprehensions of the statistical information from society stakeholders. So I believe that taking advantage of these opportunities to make use of alternative sources of information is something that is going to bridge several gaps about capabilities, but we need to strengthen international cooperation in order to make those products available for all countries, and at the same time to continue to make international statistical cooperation to keep developing capabilities in developing countries that are going to take advantage of this information. So we believe that there are many things to do, but what we believe, for example, in some geo-visualization platforms that we have made available to our citizens, for example, the street block multidimensional poverty measures for all the 1,102 municipalities of our country has been very special because people understand better what happens with poverty when they see, for example, their street block, or they see the geography of their city, or the city where they live. So we believe that, and I'm very positive about the impact of this agenda on the, let's say, appropriation of the statistical information from our citizens. So we believe that all these efforts that have been performed by the GGIM and the United Nations has been very, very important, and we can keep working together to accomplish these objectives. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Juan. Now, I think we go back to Mark.
Oh, thank you. And if there are no other questions, we can close this session, which is overrunning by 15 minutes, but we've got everyone still online, which I think denotes the interest in this area. So I say thank you very much to all the moderators, presenters, and participants here today, and wish you all to stay safe in these challenging times. And we look forward to reading your interventions and your participation at GGIM next week. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.
Bye.
Hasta luego. Gracias. Thank you very much.
Yo, que pasen bien.
Merci beaucoup. Hasta luego. Goodbye. Good day. Good evening.